The chamber was enormous. Jake Morrison had seen many impressive things in his 53 years of life. He had walked on the surface of Mars. He had watched Earth rise over the lunar horizon. He had traveled through the cold void between stars. But nothing had prepared him for the grand assembly chamber of the Galactic Council. The room stretched upward for what seemed like forever. Hundreds of platforms floated at different heights, each one holding delegates from species that humanity had only dreamed about for centuries. Some were tall and thin, with skin like polished metal. Others were massive creatures with dozens of eyes and limbs that bent in ways that made Jake's stomach turn. There were beings made of pure light, beings that looked like walking plants, and beings so strange that Jake could not even tell which part was the front and which was the back. Jake stood on a small platform at the center of the chamber, feeling very small and very human. Beside him stood Dr. Lavra Bennett, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and steady hands. She was the best xenolinguist Earth had ever produced, fluent in over 40 alien languages and capable of learning new ones in a matter of weeks. Jake was grateful to have her by his side. They had been preparing for this moment for over a decade. Humanity had made first contact with alien life 50 years ago, when a Zelrani scout ship had appeared in orbit around Neptune. Since then, humans had been watching and learning, slowly building relationships with the species that would talk to them, studying the politics of the galaxy from the outside. Now, finally, they had earned the right to submit their petition for membership in the Galactic Council. Jake took a deep breath and stepped forward. His voice echoed through the chamber, amplified by technology he did not fully understand. High Arbiter Vorath, Honor delegates of the Galactic Council, I am Ambassador Jake Morrison of the United Earth Government. I stand before you today to formally submit humanity's petition for membership in this great assembly. He paused, letting his words settle. High above him, on a platform made of crystal that caught the light like a prism, sat Vorath. The High Arbiter was not a creature of flesh and blood. Vorath was a crystalline being, a living mineral formation that had somehow developed consciousness over millions of years. When Vorath spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere at once, resonating through the chamber like music. Ambassador Morrison, your petition has been received. You may present your case. Jake nodded and began to speak. He talked about Earth, about the blue planet that had given birth to humanity. He talked about their history, their struggles, their achievements. He spoke of the great works of art that humans had created, the scientific discoveries that had pushed them into the stars, the systems of government that allowed billions of people to live together in relative peace. Lavra stood beside him, occasionally translating his words into languages that the universal translator could not handle, adding context where it was needed. She was calm and professional, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. They both knew how much was at stake. The chamber was quiet as Jake spoke. Too quiet. He had expected questions, interruptions, challenges. That was how things worked in human politics. But the alien delegates simply watched him with their many eyes, their strange faces unreadable. When Jake finished his presentation, Vorath's crystalline form pulsed with soft light. The Council has heard your words, Ambassador. We will now deliberate. You and your companion will wait in the observation gallery until we have reached our decision. Jake bowed his head in respect. Thank you, High Arbiter. He and Lavra were escorted to a smaller room off the main chamber. Through a transparent wall, they could still see the delegates moving about, gathering in small groups, their conversations hidden behind sound-dampening fields. Lavra sat down on a bench and let out a long breath. That went well, I think. Jake did not sit. He stood at the window, watching the aliens talk among themselves. Something was bothering him, a feeling he could not quite name. He had spent 30 years in the Navy before becoming a diplomat, and he had learned to trust his instincts. Right now, those instincts were telling him that something was wrong. Did you notice how they looked at us? He asked quietly. Lavra frowned. What do you mean? The way they watched us during the presentation. There was no curiosity, no interest. It was more like... He struggled to find the right words. It was like they were watching a child try to do something that adults do. Like they were amused. Lavra was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. Now that you mention it, I did notice some of the Kathvari clicking their mandibles. In their culture, that's a sign of humor. They were laughing at us. Jake's jaw tightened. He had hoped he was wrong. They waited for hours. The artificial lights in the chamber shifted through cycles, meant to imitate the passage of day and night on some distant world. Jake paced back and forth while Lavra reviewed her notes, preparing for the questions that might come during the next session. Finally, a chime sounded, and the doors to the observation gallery opened. A small floating drone hovered before them, its surface covered in blinking lights. The Council has reached a decision. Ambassador Morrison and Dr. Bennett are requested to return to the central platform. Jake looked at Lavara. She met his eyes, and he saw that she shared his concern. Whatever was coming, it would not be good. They walked back into the chamber together, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Every delegate had returned to their platform. Every eye was fixed on the two small humans standing in the center of that vast room. High Arbiter Vorith's crystal form blazed with light, as the ancient being prepared to speak. Jake stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back, his face calm. Whatever happened next, he would face it with dignity. He owed humanity that much. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Beside him, Lavra stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her. Her face betraying nothing. High Arbiter Vorith's crystalline body caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 colors as the ancient being began to speak. Ambassador Jake Morrison, Dr. Lavra Bennett, the Galactic Council has carefully considered your petition. We have reviewed your species' history, your technological achievements, and your social development. We have examined your biology, your culture, and your potential contributions to the galactic community. Jake felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps he had been wrong about the looks he had seen earlier. Perhaps the Council had recognized humanity's worth. After thorough deliberation, Vorath continued, the Council has voted unanimously to deny humanity's petition for membership. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He had prepared himself for rejection, had known it was a possibility, but hearing it spoken aloud in that vast chamber still hurt. He kept his face steady, refusing to show the disappointment that was flooding through him. Vorath was not finished. The Council has determined that humanity does not meet the minimum standards required for membership. Your species is too young, too fragile, and too primitive to participate meaningfully in galactic affairs. You are hereby barred from reapplying for a period of 500 standard years. 500 years. Jake almost laughed at the absurdity of it. That was longer than the entire history of his nation. That was longer than human civilization had even known that other intelligent life existed in the universe. Before he could respond, a massive shape rose from one of the platforms. It was a Kathvari, one of the insectoid species that Jake had noticed earlier. The creature was nearly 3 meters tall, with a hard shell that gleamed like black armor and mandibles that could snap a human in half. Its name, Jake remembered, was Skethrol. It was a senior military commander for the Kathvari Empire. If I may, High Arbiter, Skethrol said, its voice a harsh clicking sound that the translator rendered into flat, emotionless words. I wish to add some clarity to our decision, so that the humans understand why they have been rejected. Vorth's light pulsed. You may proceed, Commander. Skethrol turned its massive head toward Jake and Lavara. When it spoke, there was no mistaking the contempt in its voice. Humans are weak. Your bodies are soft and easily broken. You have no natural armor, no claws, no venom. A single Kathvari warrior could kill a dozen of your best soldiers without breaking a sweat. You cannot survive in vacuum. You cannot regenerate lost limbs. You require constant food, water, and rest. Your average lifespan is less than 100 years, which is barely enough time for a Kathvari child to learn basic combat forms. Jake felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. Another delegate rose. A serpentine creature from a species called the Velith. Its scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns as it spoke in a hissing voice. The commander speaks truth. Humans are fragile in ways that most species in this chamber cannot even comprehend. We have studied your biology. Your bones break under moderate pressure. Your organs fail when exposed to temperature extremes. Your immune systems can be overwhelmed by simple microorganisms. You are, quite simply, one of the weakest intelligent species we have ever encountered. Soft sounds rippled through the chamber. Clicks, hisses, strange vibrations that Jake's translator could not quite render into words. But he knew what they meant. The aliens were laughing. They were laughing at humanity. A third delegate spoke up, a tall being made of what looked like living metal. Your technology is also lacking. Your faster-than-light drives are crude and inefficient. Your weapons are primitive. Your medical science has barely begun to extend your short lives. By the time you develop technology worthy of this council, you will have gone extinct. More laughter. The sound filled the chamber, echoing off the walls, bouncing between platforms. Jake stood in the center of it all, feeling the weight of 300 species looking down at him with amusement and pity. Lavra stepped closer to him. She did not touch him, but her presence was a comfort. "They think we are nothing," she whispered, her voice too quiet for anyone else to hear. Jake nodded slightly. "Let them think that." Voreth raised one crystalline limb, and the laughter slowly faded. "The council's decision is final. Ambassador Morrison, Dr. Bennett, you are dismissed. Please leave the chamber and return to your vessel. You may depart Nexus Prime at your convenience." Jake knew he should turn and walk away. He knew that staying would accomplish nothing, that the council had made its decision and that nothing he could say would change their minds. But something inside him refused to accept it. Something stubborn and fierce and fundamentally human. "High Arbiter," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "I request a final statement." Voreth's light flickered. "A final statement?" Under Article 7 of the Council's own charter, any species whose petition has been denied has the right to make a final statement before departing. I am invoking that right. There was a pause. Jake could feel the surprise rippling through the chamber. The aliens had not expected him to know their own rules. They had not expected him to fight back. Even in this small way, Voreth consulted briefly with several nearby delegates, then turned back to Jake. "Very well, Ambassador. The Council will grant you a final statement. You have 12 minutes. Use them as you wish." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small chip, no larger than his thumbnail. He held it up for the chamber to see. "I do not intend to make a speech," he said. "Instead, I request permission to show the Council a short visual record. A clip from Earth's history." Skethril made a clicking sound that might have been a snort. "What could your primitive world possibly show us that would be of any interest?" Jake looked directly at the massive insectoid, his eyes steady and calm. "Perhaps nothing. Perhaps everything. That is for the Council to decide." Voreth considered for a moment, then pulsed with light. "Permission granted. You may proceed." Jake handed the chip to Lava. She walked to a console at the edge of their platform and inserted it into the display system. Jake watched her work for a moment, then turned back to face the assembled delegates. "There is an old saying on Earth," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "It is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog." The translator struggled with the idiom, and Jake could see confusion on many alien faces. Good, let them wonder what it meant. They would understand soon enough. He walked back to his spot beside Lavra. She had finished the upload and was waiting for him, her hand hovering over the activation control. Their eyes met and she gave him a small nod. "Ready?" she whispered. Jake took a deep breath. "Ready?" The lights in the chamber dimmed. The holographic display at the center of the room flickered to life, and the clip began to play. The holographic display was massive, stretching across the entire center of the chamber so that every delegate could see clearly. For a moment there was only darkness and silence. Then the first image appeared, and the story of humanity began to unfold. It started with a mountain. Not just any mountain, but Everest. The highest point on Earth. The footage showed a group of climbers struggling through a blizzard. Their bodies wrapped in thick clothing, their faces hidden behind masks and goggles. The temperature reading in the corner of the screen showed negative 40 degrees. The wind speed was nearly 200 kilometers per hour. One of the climbers fell. He slid several meters down the icy slope before catching himself on a rocky outcrop. His companions immediately turned back, fighting against the wind to reach him. They pulled him up, checked his equipment, and then continued climbing together. A Velith delegate hissed softly. "Why do they not turn back?" "They will die in those conditions." No one answered. The footage continued. Now the scene changed to a desert, vast and empty and burning under a merciless sun. A human was running across the sand, legs pumping, arms swinging. The display showed his vital signs: heart rate elevated to dangerous levels, body temperature approaching the point of organ failure, muscles screaming with exhaustion. Yet he kept running. The footage explained that this was an ultramarathon, a race of over 200 kilometers across one of the hottest places on Earth. The runner had been moving for over 20 hours. His body was shutting down, but his spirit refused to stop. Skethril leaned forward, mandibles clicking. The giant insectoid said nothing, but its eyes were fixed on the screen. The clip shifted again. Now the display showed the ocean, dark and cold and impossibly deep. A human in a small vessel was descending into the abyss, going deeper than any human had gone before. The pressure at that depth was enough to crush steel. One small crack in the vessel's hull would mean instant death. The human inside the vessel was smiling. His voice crackled through the speakers, excited and full of wonder, as he described the strange creatures he was seeing in the darkness. He was not afraid. He was amazed. Lavra watched the faces of the alien delegates as the footage played. The laughter had stopped. The clicking and hissing had faded to silence. They were watching now with something that looked almost like confusion, as if they could not understand what they were seeing. The clip transitioned to scenes of human warfare. This part was harder to watch. Jake had argued for including it, saying that the council needed to see everything, not just the pretty parts. Lavra had eventually agreed. The display showed a battle from one of Earth's many wars. Soldiers were charging across open ground, running directly into enemy fire. Explosions tore through their ranks. Men and women fell, screaming, bleeding, dying. And still the others kept coming. A voiceover explained what the council was seeing. This was not a victory. This was a defeat. The soldiers knew they could not win. They knew they were going to die. They charged anyway, because behind them were thousands of civilians who needed time to escape. They bought that time with their lives. One scene showed a young medic named Kevin, barely 20 years old, dragging wounded soldiers to safety one by one. His left arm had been torn open by shrapnel, and blood was flowing freely down his sleeve. He ignored the wound and kept working, kept pulling his friends out of the line of fire, kept saving lives until his own body finally gave out. When the footage showed him collapsing, still reaching for one more fallen soldier, several delegates shifted uncomfortably on their platforms. The clip moved on, showing more examples of human resilience. Firefighters running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. Rescue workers digging through the rubble of collapsed structures for days without sleep, refusing to give up hope that survivors might still be found. Ordinary people forming human chains during floods, passing strangers from hand to pull them out of the rushing water. Then came the historical footage, images from Earth's long and violent past. The display showed the ice ages, when glaciers covered much of the planet and temperatures dropped low enough to kill most life. Humans survived by adapting, by learning to make fire, by huddling together in caves and refusing to surrender to the cold. It showed the plagues, diseases that swept across continents and killed millions. Each time, humans rebuilt. Each time, they came back stronger than before. It showed the wars, the terrible wars that had nearly destroyed the species more than once. The display lingered on images of nuclear explosions, mushroom clouds rising over ruined cities, the aftermath of humanity's own capacity for destruction. The message was clear: humans had faced extinction at their own hands and still found a way to survive. High Arbiter Vorth's crystalline form was pulsing with complex patterns of light. The ancient being had lived for millions of years and had seen countless species rise and fall. But there was something in these images that was making even Vorth pay attention. The clip was approaching its final segment. Lavra felt her heart beating faster. This was the part that mattered most, the part that Jake had insisted on including above all else. The display showed a ship, a human vessel called the Horizon. It was small by galactic standards, just a scout craft with a crew of 12. The footage was from 3 years ago, from an incident that the Council had classified and filed away without much interest. The Horizon had been on a routine patrol when it encountered something terrible. The display showed the creature and several delegates gasped. It was a void leviathan, a living nightmare that drifted between the stars. The Council had classified void leviathans as unkillable. When one was spotted, the protocol was simple: run and hope it did not follow, but the Horizon could not run. Behind it were 17 colony ships, slow, civilian transports carrying over 500,000 people. If the Horizon fled, the Leviathan would catch the colony ships and devour them all. The footage showed the bridge of the Horizon. The captain was a woman named Amy Price, 34 years old, with short dark hair and a calm voice. She was looking at her crew, and they were looking at her. They all knew what had to be done. Lavra watched the alien delegates as they realized what was about to happen. She saw understanding dawn on their strange faces, saw the moment when they began to grasp what humans were truly capable of. Captain Amy Price gave her final orders. The crew did not hesitate. They began preparing the reactor for overload, turning their small ship into a weapon. They plotted a course directly into the Leviathan's maw. They sent a final message to the colony ships, telling them to run and not look back. The display showed the Horizon accelerating toward the monster, growing smaller and smaller against its impossible bulk. Then there was a flash of light, brighter than any star, and both the ship and the creature were gone, all hands lost. 12 humans dead. 500,000 people saved. The display faded to black, and the chamber fell into absolute silence. The silence that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. It was not simply the absence of sound. It was a living thing, a weight that pressed down on the entire chamber and held every creature frozen in place. Jake stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his face calm. He did not speak. He did not need to. The clip had said everything that needed to be said. Beside him, Lavra was watching the alien delegates. Their reactions were fascinating. The Veloth representative had stopped moving entirely, its serpentine body coiled tight, its bioluminescent scales pulsing in strange patterns. Several of the smaller delegates had drawn back from their platform edges, as if trying to put distance between themselves and the holographic display. Even the beings made of pure energy seemed dimmer somehow. Their light subdued. High Arbiter Vorth's crystal form was cycling through colors that Jake had never seen before. The ancient being was clearly processing what it had just witnessed, trying to fit this new information into a framework built over millions of years of existence. But it was Skethril who broke the silence first, the massive Kethvari. Commander stepped forward on its platform, its armored body catching the light. When it spoke, there was no trace of the contempt that had been there before. Its voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if it was afraid of the answer it might receive. "How?" Skethril asked. "How is this possible?" Jake looked up at the insectoid, meeting its compound eyes without flinching. "How is what possible, Commander? Your species lives for less than a century. Your bodies are fragile. You feel pain. You know fear." Skethril's mandibles clicked slowly, searching for words. "And yet you throw yourselves into death as if it means nothing. You fight against impossible odds. You sacrifice yourselves for strangers. How can creatures so weak possess such to such madness?" Lavra suggested quietly. Skethril's head turned toward her. "I was going to say courage, but perhaps madness is closer to the truth." The Velith representative spoke up, its hissing voice cutting through the stillness. The horizon. The council classified that incident. We knew a human vessel had been destroyed, but we did not know the circumstances. We did not know they had actually killed a void leviathan. The serpentine creature paused, its scales shifting color. The Velith have been spacefaring for 60,000 years. In all that time, we have never killed a void leviathan. We have only ever fled from them. Jake nodded slowly. The crew of the Horizon knew what they were facing. They knew the odds. Captain Amy Price had a husband and 2 young children waiting for her on Earth. Her first officer, a man named Greg Santos, was 3 weeks away from retirement. The youngest crew member was 22 years old and had just finished his training. They all knew they were going to die. They made that choice anyway. Another delegate spoke, a tall being whose body appeared to be made of interlocking geometric shapes. Why? What could possibly motivate such a sacrifice? What do they gain from death? Jake turned to face the being. They gain nothing. They are dead. But the 500,000 people on those colony ships are alive because of what they did. Their children are alive. Their families are alive. And someday, those people will tell their children about the crew of the Horizon, about the 12 who gave everything so that others might live. That is what they gained. That is what they died for. The chamber fell silent again. Jake could see the aliens struggling to process this idea. For most of them, survival was the highest priority, the driving force behind everything they did. The concept of willingly choosing death for the sake of strangers was alien to them in a way that went beyond biology or culture. Lavra stepped forward. Standing beside Jake, her voice was steady and clear as she addressed the council. You look at humanity and you see weakness. You see our short lives and our fragile bodies and our limited technology, and you laugh. You think we are insects to be brushed aside, children to be ignored. She paused, letting her words sink in. But you are missing something fundamental about our species. Something that your instruments cannot measure and your scientists cannot explain. She gestured toward the now dark holographic display. What you just saw was not an exception. It was not a rare occurrence. It is who we are. Throughout our entire history, humans have been throwing themselves against impossible obstacles and somehow coming out the other side. We have survived ice ages, plagues, famines, wars, and near-extinction events that would have ended most species. We have climbed the highest mountains on our world and descended into its deepest oceans. We have walked on our moon and sent our machines to the edges of our solar system. And every step of the way, we have been told that we cannot do it, that it is impossible, that we should give up and accept our limits. We never listen. Jake picked up where she left off. You asked how creatures so weak can fight with such ferocity. The answer is simple. We fight because we are weak. We know our lives are short. We know our bodies are fragile. We know that the universe is vast and cold and does not care whether we live or die. And because we know these things, we have learned to treasure every moment of existence. We have learned to fight for what matters, to protect those we love, to never, ever surrender. He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate he could. When a Kethvari faces danger, it relies on its armor and its strength. When a Velith faces danger, it trusts in its speed and its venom. But when a human faces danger, we have nothing to rely on except our will, our stubbornness, our absolute refusal to accept defeat. And sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is more than enough. Skethril spoke again, and this time there was something new in its voice. Something that sounded almost like respect. The young medic in the footage, Kevin, his arm was destroyed, his body failing, and still he kept saving his comrades. I have commanded warriors for 3 centuries. I have seen bravery in many forms, but I have never seen anything like that. Jake nodded. Kevin survived, actually. They managed to save him, though he lost the arm. When he recovered, he went right back to work. Said he still had 2 legs and 1 good arm, and that was enough to keep helping people. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The aliens were talking to each other now, their voices low and uncertain. The mood in the room had shifted completely. The laughter was gone, replaced by something else entirely. High Arbiter Vorath's crystal form pulsed with bright light, calling the chamber to attention. When the ancient being spoke, its voice resonated with something that Jake had not heard before: uncertainty. Ambassador Morrison. The council must discuss what we have seen here today. This will require time. I suggest you and Dr. Bennett return to the observation gallery while we deliberate. Jake bowed his head. Of course, High Arbiter. Take all the time you need. As he and Lavra turned to leave, Vorath spoke again. Ambassador, the saying you mentioned earlier, about the dog and the fight. Jake paused and looked back. Yes, High Arbiter. I believe I understand its meaning now. The crystalline being's light flickered in a complex pattern. It is not a boast. It is a warning. Jake allowed himself a small smile. I suppose it could be seen that way. He and Lavra walked out of the chamber, leaving 300 alien species to contemplate what they had just witnessed. The doors closed behind them, cutting off the sound of agitated voices and uncertain debates. Lavra let out a long breath. It went well, I think. Jake nodded slowly. Now we wait and see if it was enough. The wait was longer this time. Jake and Lavara sat in the observation gallery for nearly 8 hours, watching through the transparent wall as the Galactic Council argued and debated. They could not hear what was being said, but they could see the movements, the gestures, the obvious disagreements between delegates. Several times, groups of aliens would cluster together on their platforms, engaged in intense discussions. More than once, Jake saw Skethral rise and address the chamber, its massive arms sweeping through the air as it made some point. Other delegates would respond, some in apparent agreement, others in clear opposition. Lavra tried to read their body language, to guess what was being said, but the species were too diverse, their gestures too unfamiliar. All she could do was wait. Jake spent the time in silence, sitting on a bench near the window, his eyes fixed on the chamber below. He had done everything he could. The rest was out of his hands. Whatever the council decided, he would accept it with grace and bring the news back to Earth. That was his duty, but deep inside, in a place he rarely examined, he hoped. He hoped that the aliens had understood what they had seen. He hoped that they had recognized the truth about humanity. And he hoped, perhaps foolishly, that it would be enough. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the floating drone appeared again at the entrance to the gallery. Its lights blinked in a pattern that Jake had learned to recognize. The council has reached a decision. Ambassador Morrison and Dr. Bennett are requested to return to the central platform. Jake stood and straightened his uniform. Lover rose beside him, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeves. They looked at each other for a long moment, and then Jake nodded. Whatever happens, he said, we did our best. Lover smiled. We did more than that. We showed them who we really are. They walked back into the Grand Assembly chamber, and immediately Jake noticed that something had changed. The atmosphere was different. The delegates were not looking at them with amusement or contempt anymore. There was something else in their eyes now, something that Jake could not quite identify. He and Lavra took their places on the central platform. The chamber fell silent, and High Arbiter Vorath began to speak. Ambassador Morrison, Dr. Bennett, the council has spent many hours discussing what you have shown us today. We have debated the meaning of your footage, the implications of your history, and the nature of your species. The crystalline being paused, light rippling through its form. I must confess that in all my years as High Arbiter I have never witnessed such a contentious deliberation. The council was deeply divided. Jake kept his face neutral, waiting. However, Vorath continued, after much discussion, we have reached a new consensus. By a margin of 217 to 83, the Council has voted to reverse its earlier decision. Humanity's petition for membership is hereby approved. You will be granted provisional status for a period of 50 years, after which you will be eligible for full membership. For a moment, Jake was not sure he had heard correctly. The words seemed to echo in his mind, taking their time to sink in. Then Lavra grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his sleeve. And he knew it was real. High Arbiter, he managed to say, keeping his voice steady with an effort. On behalf of the people of Earth, I thank you. This is a great honor. Vorth's light pulsed in a pattern that Jake had come to recognize as something like a nod. Do not thank me, Ambassador. Thank yourself and your people. You have shown us something today that has changed how many of us view your species. Skethril rose from its platform, the massive insectoid towering above the other delegates. When it spoke, there was no trace of mockery in its voice, only a kind of wary respect. I had voted against humanity in the first decision, the Kethvari commander said. I believed your species to be weak and unworthy. I was wrong? It paused, mandibles clicking slowly. I have fought in many wars. I have faced enemies that outmatched me in strength and numbers. But I have never faced an enemy that would willingly die, knowing they could not win, simply to buy time for strangers to escape. Such an enemy. Skethril fell silent for a moment. Such an enemy would be terrifying to face in battle. The Velith representative spoke next, its serpentine body coiling and uncoiling with nervous energy. The Velith voted to approve humanity's petition. We did so because we recognize something dangerous in your species. You do not know your limits. You push beyond them again and again, breaking yourselves against obstacles that should stop you, and somehow you keep coming back. We believe it is better to have such a species as an ally than as an adversary. Other delegates added their voices, some praising human courage, others expressing concern about what they had witnessed. Jake listened to all of it, keeping his face calm, filing away every word for the report he would send back to Earth. But it was the geometric being who said something that stuck with Jake long after the ceremony was over. We have made a decision today that will change the future of this galaxy, the angular creature said, its voice resonating through the chamber. We have invited humans to join us. We have opened our doors to a species that does not know the meaning of surrender, that fights beyond the point of reason, that treats death as merely another obstacle to be overcome. I wonder, in 100 years, which of us will be grateful for this decision and which will regret it. The chamber fell silent. No one had an answer after the formal ceremony was complete. Jake and Lavar were escorted to a reception area where various delegates approached them to offer congratulations. Jake shook hands, tentacles, claws, and appendages he could not name. Accepting well wishes from creatures that had been laughing at him just hours before, when they finally had a moment alone, Lavra turned to him with a tired smile. We did it. Jake nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about what the geometric being had said, about the uncertainty in its voice. He was thinking about the fear he had seen in the eyes of the delegates, hidden beneath their respect. They are afraid of us, he said quietly. Lavar glanced at him. Is that a bad thing? Jake considered the question. I do not know. Fear can be useful. It can keep enemies at bay, prevent conflicts before they start. But it can also breed resentment, suspicion. It can make friends into enemies if we are not careful. He looked out through a viewport at the stars beyond, the vast and endless darkness that humanity had only just begun to explore. Out there were wonders beyond imagination, dangers beyond comprehension, and now, perhaps, allies who would stand with Earth against whatever came next. We will have to be careful, he said finally. We will have to show them that we are not just warriors. We are builders, creators, dreamers. We can be partners, not just soldiers. Lavar nodded. That will take time. We have time. Jake smiled slightly. Not as much as them, maybe, but enough. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. Somewhere behind them, the Galactic Council was still buzzing with discussion, the events of the day rippling outward through 300 civilizations. Word would spread across the galaxy. The humans had been admitted to the Council. The weak, fragile, short-lived humans, who had killed an unkillable monster and laughed in the face of death. Lavra spoke softly, almost to herself. They have no idea what we are truly capable of, do they? Jake shook his head. No, they have seen only a small piece of our history, a few examples of what humans can do when pushed to the edge. They think they understand us now. He turned away from the viewport, straightening his uniform one last time before the long journey home. Perhaps it is better that way, he said. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them imagine what else humans might do when the stakes are high enough. Lavra followed him toward the docking bay where their ship was waiting. Behind them, the Grand Assembly chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with new energy, with new questions, with new fears and new hopes. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. And as Jake Morrison walked toward his ship, he allowed himself one small, satisfied smile. That was exactly as it should be.